Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Madhur Katuria, and I'm going to be your co-learner for today. Welcome to this webinar on Agile matrices. Obviously, there are a lot of matrices that we can track when we build software, but we are going to just try to get an initiation on how Agile matrices work uh, in a world that we are living in now, that we are working on now. If you have any questions related to the content that we are going to be talking about, please feel free to put it in the questions pane. And throughout the webinar, we are going to be talking about these questions as we go along. So please put your questions, and then we'll be ready to go. In case you have any difficulty in understanding this, recording will also be available onto our YouTube channel from Agile. So please feel free to connect later also and listen to the recording. In fact, Sachin has a question right away before we get started. So to claim your SEUs for this webinar, you should go to your Scrum dashboard and then add the relevant details with the link to this webinar, and then you can log your SEUs. You will get one SEU for every 1 hour of learning, so you can claim one SEU for this webinar. So I believe we are good to go. So just before we start, some of our friends have joined from other countries also apart from India. So a good morning or a good evening to them, depending on which time zone you are in. So let's get started. Now, when it comes to Agile matrices, it has always been a confusing area in terms of what to measure and what not to measure in an Agile world. So this is a brief agenda of what we are going to be discussing. We'll talk about measurements in an Agile world and how they are different. We will talk about different matrices at team and organization level and how you can work around those. Then we will talk about how to do continuous measurements and updates and how can we use them. So let's get started. Now, in a traditional world, we have been used to using those matrices where it is more about fault finding. Of did this person or did this role do this job their role perfectly? Oh, the QA did not work perfectly, so that's why we had a lot of bugs. The developer did not work perfectly, so that's why we have a lot of problems. Where did the problem happen in design? So traditional matrices are more focused on finding the fault with each other or with the respective roles, and also to more find the root cause of a problem rather than focusing on what really needs to be done to improve the future. So most of the matrices in a traditional world are more focused on past, but as probably you would know, the agile teams are different. Agile teams, and probably some of you have already seen this little image. Agile teams are more focused on what remains to be done, how far they are away from their goal, what all they need to do to make sure they have reached their goals. So that means for them, measuring what remains is more important than how much the distance we have covered. Almost similar to any sports team, whether it's a cricket team or a soccer team or a rugby team. For them, it is not much important how much time has elapsed or how much goal they have covered, how much distance they have covered from their own goal, but how much they still need to complete. So this is the primary focus when we talk about agile matrices also. Now, without taking a detour, I'll quickly jump into the agile matrices and we'll try to go through them one by one. Now, okay. So yes, so Kaja, thanks for correcting it. So we'll talk about the metric yes. So Agile metric presents progressive and constructive feedback to teams and organizations. They also help the teams in continuous improvement rather than just finding fault, and it also helps them continuously improve. So in case after a while the team does not find a particular metric very useful, they can actually change it. Unlike our traditional metrics, where we are so used to continuing the same metric over and over again for years uh, without probably going forward. Uh, Yes, so in case you are not able to see the presentation, I am again sharing it once more, and please make sure that you are able to see the presentation. It should be on. If you go to your on your webinar screen, you should be able to see it on the right. So you just put on show application, you should be able to see those slides. Now, let's now go deep dive into agile metrics and see what different metrics are available to for the teams or for the organizations as they go along. Let's first talk about the metric for productivity. Now, 5 or 6 metrics that I could think of, I put them. There could be many more, but these are the primary ones that I have been able to focus on. Now, acceleration, for example, is one metric which you can look into. Now, acceleration is different from velocity. Now, velocity typically, if a lot of you would have been using story points or number of user stories to measure your team's performance, acceleration more focuses on what is the rate of change of velocity. Are my teams really progressing? Or the teams are stable? Or are they really jumping around? Now, typically, a good Scrum team, I'll not talk about the Agile team because that's also a different perspective, but a good Scrum team would improve upon their velocity sprint over sprint. So you cannot set a target, oh, every sprint the team has to definitely move up by 10%. I've seen a lot of organizations actually setting up those kind of targets for their teams. Yet, it is a good idea to track how your teams are improving sprint over sprint. So let's say for the first 3 sprints, if you just go to this graphic on the screen, uh, the typical average velocity between iteration 2 and iteration 4 is about 13 story points. But as they go along to iteration 4, 5 and 6, it improves to about 14 to 15 story points. So the number of the average change that is there is about 2 story points per sprint, so which is an acceleration. So the acceleration in this case, if you see, is about 2 story points per sprint. Uh, as compared between iteration 2 to iteration 4, from iteration 5 to iteration 8. So rather than measuring just the velocity, you should also measure the rate of change of velocity. So for first 3 sprints, probably we are delivering about 12 story points. For the next 3 sprints, we are delivering 14 story points. So that's an improvement of 2 story points every sprint. So this will give you your acceleration. Now you can also track it as a graph in a simple way that how much we improved every sprint, and this should give a line graph of how it works. Or you can simply draw this velocity chart, velocity burn-up chart that you see, how my teams are improving from iteration 0 to iteration 8. And that should give an idea of, if you see the graph is continuously going up, almost like a parabola, so it should continuously keep on going up. Now, Sachin has a question that because when we talk about velocity, it is typically related to a sprint. So when you use Kanban, can velocity and acceleration not be used there? So yes, very well, but then you will have to find out a way. For example, let's say in a week you might want to track a progress. So your cycle could be 1 week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on your time. Now, a lot of time also this happens that as the teams are progressing when you're using Kanban, their builds might actually come out a little later. Now, the acceleration metric is dependent on whether a particular user story or particular backlog item is complete. Correct? So you have to focus from that perspective on what is your cycle time and what is your measuring time. So yes, in Kanban also you can do that. Adarsh has a question here. Should the state be linear? And after some time, this may become constant. How do we measure that? If you see Adarsh here, typically at least for first 8-9 months that I've seen most of the project, this velocity or this is almost always rising. Yes, when you are probably closer to release, when you are really achieved all the optimum level, there will always be something to improve. So if the team is continuously focused on process improvements, they're focusing on conflict management improvements, they're focusing on uh, integrating continuously, there will always be some improvement that you can bring to your velocity. Yes, if your team has really reached a linear state, first you need to analyze on is there any still way, maybe use of tools, maybe eliminating more waste, we can really do that. But that also could be a good retrospective point of can we really improve further. Okay. Now, Srinivas has a question here in terms of what exactly is the meaning of story points here that I've been talking about, and what a user story may equal to a number of hours. Just to explain this, for those of you who may not be aware of the story point concept, now story point represent a relative measure of the size and complexity of a particular backlog item or a particular user story, to be very precise. They represent the size and complexity of the feature relative to other features, other requirements in a given backlog. So you might find one item in your backlog or two items in your backlog which are reference items, let's say very small or medium, and then you compare another item. Let's say we are talking about a login screen. So if you give your login screen and a point 1, how would you rate a big user creation form? Maybe 3 times more complex or 3 times more size. So now that 3 as a number represents story points. If you want to read more, I would recommend some of the readings by Mike Cohen on his blog mountaingodsoftware.com. Or you can also download and read the book called as Agile Estimation and Planning by Mike Cohen, which explains the concept of story points more. So we can take it forward from here. Now, typically you cannot, the other question which Srinivas asked was, how many hours could a typical user story be equal to? Now, you really cannot put a number of hours on a user story. The reason being, for a typical functionality, for a typical requirement which a user story represents, there may be multiple team members working. And when there are multiple team members working, the number of hours they take to complete their respective tasks may also vary. For example, if I don't know anything about Java, to develop the same login screen, I would take probably 24 hours, whereas somebody who is very experienced and he has a good knowledge about Java may just take probably 6 hours. So you cannot really put exact number of hours or a generic numbers of hours to every user story. Right? Now, in fact, there is a question which has come which is very interesting, which I want to definitely answer. So, Pankaj has a question that as the team matures, their estimations also more mature. So then this will decrease their velocity. I would rather dispute that fact. In case the teams are getting more and more mature as they go along, they have been stable together, it should not actually decrease their velocity, it should increase their velocity, because now they have more domain knowledge, they have more product knowledge, technology knowledge. So within the same given amount of time, which is 2 weeks, earlier they were probably doing 3 medium stories of 5 points each, about 15 story points or 15 points. Now they should be able to do maybe 25 points at the same time. So it would increase their velocity rather than decreasing their velocity if your reference remains the same. So it is very important that for your whole backlog, your reference item is the same. It does not change every sprint. Now, Romil has a question that if the team changes due to attrition and other reasons, how can we use this data point? Now, yes, it is a very important part, as I say in some of my classes also, that for any velocity metric to make sense, any velocity KPI to make sense, your team has to be as much stable as possible. Right? Because even if you have added one team member and reduced one team member, your calibrations will change. So you have to be, even if you take the same measure of acceleration and so on, you would typically see it going down for a certain time and then again picking up. In fact, that could be a good way to tell the management if there are too many changes, then our team's acceleration is going to be unstable. So if you want really the team to accelerate, create more stable teams. Now Bharati has a question here. Ravi has a question here. In case we use time estimate, can we also use this metric? Yes, you can very well use this metric because story points is just one of the ways to measure velocity. You can simply say the number of stories we can or number of features we are delivering in a sprint or a given week. So if you're just using the number of features or number of stories delivered in a week, you can still do that. Because in that case, your large stories or very large stories might become equal to two stories, and a very small story become a half story. So you can say we are delivering 5 stories every week. So even that could be one of the KPIs you can use. Now, Bindu has a question here. So should we use the calculating the capacity of the team for this particular part in number of hours? Gradually, as the team, so initial few sprints, few iterations, few weeks when you are running, because of the traditional ways of working, we may still measure number of hours. But as the team remains stable, uh, then the team would typically not need all these numbers because they know we have been working for 2 weeks, we are the 8 team members. Unless there are some holidays and so on, which you can reduce your capacity by 10%, you may not need it later on. Okay. Yes, so Bhargav has a question here that let's say the team is using, and this is one of my favorite questions in my classes also. Let's say the team is working on both defects and user stories. Then how do you measure this metric? So it is not necessary that there are two different kind of backlog items. You measure them with the same yardstick. So for your stories or real functionality or the business value you are delivering, your measure could be different. For your defects that you are putting, which is actually a cost on your velocity, you could have you should have a totally different. I would not say you could have. You should have a totally different metric because if you merge both of these, it will artificially inflate your acceleration or velocity and not really showcase to the team that their quality is really not up to the mark. Okay. So you have to be careful while using this metric because you have because it is very prone to be misused also. You cannot tell a team because team A is doing a particular acceleration and velocity, team B also has to use this. So agile matrices in that way are more relevant only to one organization, on one team. So when you measure the progress, you should also measure it with the team's previous performance. So maybe in the last release, last sprint, as the case might be. Right? Hiruna has a question. Thanks for joining from Sri Lanka, Hiruna. Hiruna has a question that as the estimations become more accurate, the velocity will go to a constant. Yes, after a certain point of time, it may become constant, but at least what I've seen in the industry, that is sometimes a really long way away because there will always be some improvements you can make. Maybe we can have a better confidence management system. Maybe we can reduce the time spent on meetings a little. Maybe we can focus on how do we work on DevOps and CI/CD. So this will continuously keep on helping you for a lot of time. And as I said when we started this session, it is not that always you will probably keep on sticking on to the same KPI. As the team progresses, and now you know that maybe our velocity or acceleration is stabilized, it is no longer useful. You can focus on other matrices also. While this being just as a baseline, that this is something that we are definitely reaching. Neil has a question here whether there is any industry specific definition or the standard for acceleration. Unfortunately, no, and this could never be because every team is different. Their way of working is different. Their backlog is different, right? So you have to continuously calibrate against the same team's performance. So there could be no industry standard definition. So I'm going to take the last question around this acceleration topic and then we'll do the next metric. Okay. So the Muni's question I just answered because you had a similar question to Hiruna in terms of when you reach a peak and then what do you do? Gaurav has a question here which is a very interesting one. Does acceleration have a relation to productivity has a relation to acceleration? I would say yes, to some extent, and probably a lot of authors and a lot of speakers might disagree with me. Uh, Productivity reflects into acceleration, because if the team is bogged down by any of the reasons, they didn't have sufficient backlog, they didn't have any clarity, and so on, the number of items they can produce in a sprint would typically be lesser. And and in case your acceleration is better, that means they are continuously producing more, they are continuously at the top of their productivity. So yes, in some sense, acceleration might also show you how better productivity is. Okay. Yes, so Abhishek has a question which is very interesting. Uh, as we reach the nearing of a release close, typically the new functionality will be lesser as compared to defects. So there will be a drop at point. I think this is into the another question that I answered earlier. When you are near the release, this should peak. This should be at a certain level at a point of time, and then this metric will not be useful. But if you are focusing on quality, if you are focusing on um, continuous improvement, I don't think so. Your defects will be more at the end of the release. So you would probably even drop down to zero. Okay, we are now starting a new release, and you now started thinking about the next release. So Zahid joins us from Dubai, Abu Dhabi rather. So no, the question here is you should not use this to compare two teams, because if you try to compare two teams, their action levels might be different. Yes, one way of comparison between these two teams might be maybe one team is accelerating and one team is decelerating. Then you might have a cause of concern. So this could give you some indication of that. So Benson, I did answer that question earlier. You should track story development or new functionality development versus defects separately, because if you merge them together, it will never show you the real picture of whether we are delivering real business value uh, or you are actually delivering more defects, because if you merge them, it will show you an inflated acceleration which will not help anyone. Hemant has an interesting question for me here. So productivity is equal to story point over team capacity. I would rather refrain from making that comment or comparison, Hemant, because moment you say the team productivity equals the number of story points delivered over a given period of time, what might so happen is, let's say in sprint number 3, the team was waiting for a build from a different team, another dependent team, and they could never complete their work. So then has the productivity of the team dropped to zero? Maybe not. So that's why I said please use this metric and with a pinch of salt. Abhishek has a question which is probably in addition to what I just now mentioned. So if acceleration is different for two teams, how can we compare these acceleration for two different teams? Now, it is not the absolute values that you compare, but whether one team is continuously accelerating or are they jumping around with their velocity, other team is stable, third team is accelerating. So you have to focus and compare from that perspective. Now with this, I am going to move to the next slide or next KPI, which is lead time. Now, lead time comes actually from the Kanban word of agility, where it typically stands for the time a particular requirement, a particular functionality has taken to, let's say, move from backlog to deliver. Now, you see there's very interesting colorful lines on this slide, or these areas on this slide. On the x-axis, it represents the weeks passed by or the sprints as they pass by. And on the y-axis is the number of features or number of requirements which are in that given area. And if you would see on the right hand side, the legend also tells that each of these colors represent a different stage of how your requirement passes through. So being in the backlog to finally out to the development and maybe deployment also, you can add more areas here. So if you would see initially when you started the project, the yellow area is looking more, so that means we have a lot of requirements on the which are in the backlog. And then there is some analysis which is already going on for a few items. If you see that little bottom green line just below the yellow, then there is a solution overview happening for the few requirements, and then HLD details. So if you see all these areas stacked from left to right, but as the work progresses, as the team progresses over a period of maybe 3 months in this case, you would see the yellow area is decreasing. That means the requirements are moved away from backlog, and now they are moving more towards either requirements analysis or detailed design, or they are in the planning stage, they are in the demo stage, as the case might be. And on the right hand side, you see the red color where the requirements have gone into development. So this should continuously keep on increasing. Now, if you take at any given point of time a straight line from left to right, let's say at point number 20 or 24, it would give you an idea about how many requirements are still in the backlog stage, how many requirements are in the requirement stage, how many requirements are in the um, solutions overview, so on and so forth. So if you just draw a single line also, it would give you for one requirement how much time it took from being in the backlog to actually being delivered. So let's say at point number 20, I had where a requirement number 20, so the left hand side, there's a 20. So let me try to draw this line here. So let's say I've got this line which I draw from left to right till here. So it would give me an idea about, so my drawing is not very Picasso-like, so sorry about that. It would give you an idea about one requirement, for example, stayed in the backlog for about 3 days, then it was into the requirement stage for 2 days, and then it was in the detailed design stage for probably 3 weeks, as the case might be, and then it continued forward. And this is exactly the lead time, the calendar time which elapses between the time the requirement entered into the backlog versus the time it was actually moved to production or moved to the deployment demo. So this would give you a good idea about whether we are really being agile or whether we are not so agile and we are actually implementing waterfall within the projects or waterfall within the release. Now, I have a question from Abhishek here, that lead time is for one story, user story specific, or can we take the mean for all the stories to get complete? I would say it's a running average rather, Abhishek. Yes, for a particular story, you can also find a lead time, but if you have a bunch of stories you need to complete, you can also find a mean and then try to see how on an average the team is progressing. So you can absolutely do that. This lead time or this little graph also show you the bottlenecks. For example, how many requirements were actually in a particular stage at a given point of time. So if you see between 21st December to 29th of December 2009 here, there are about 10 requirements which are actually in the solutions overview stage. So at the time, the team is working on 10 requirements which are kind of just at a solutions overview stage. So it would also give you the cycle time that the requirement or the requirements are spending in each area. So once you draw this graph, and there are a lot many tools which are available which can give you more idea about these matrices, graphs, metrics, graphs that we and how we can use them. A lot of Kanban tools like Trello, Sinaju, even Zira has those kind of graphs and reports available, which can help you to track the lead time and then make use of it. But typically, as most of us are aware, the lead time of a particular requirement or a product backlog item should be minimal. If it is more than one release, it is more than 3 months, for example, that means you are really not being agile. So try to make sure that the lead times are the smallest possible. What the customers give is what they get the fastest. And then you can keep on adding items to your backlog. Okay? So this was one of the KPI that I want to talk about. Another important metric that you can look at is your number of features that you can draw, number of running tested features at a given point of time. So if you would see, sorry about that, if you would show in those little graphic or slide that I have seen in a release over a given sprint, how many number of features, how many number of requirements are running and tested at a given point of time. Now, as the team continuously builds upon or continuously prepares a product increment, So that means the number of features live and into production at a given point of time should continue increasing. So that's why you see this graph which is going up. Sprint 1 probably we could not deliver anything which was running and tested and into production. But Sprint 2 we had 3 features. Sprint 2 we had 2 features. Sprint 3 we had 3 features. Again in Sprint 4 we did not deliver anything new. So if you see the number still remains 3. Some of you yes, Abhishek, I'm just going to answer your question. Some of you probably see on sprint number 8, there is actually a dip. So that is where when the team added a new feature to production, which actually broke or which actually stopped 2 other features or 1 other feature. That's why the number of running tested features has gone down. So now when I say features, it could represent, you can use this KPI at any level. You can use it at an epic level or a very large story level. You can use it at a user story or a small story level, or you can use it at a medium feature level also. So the same KPI can be used at multiple levels depending on the level of your backlog items, depending on the number of items you want to track or for the period that you want to track. You can even track it over releases. So through multiple releases, how many features, how many requirements were actually active and running. So you can even use that. Now let's go to the next KPI. So if you have any questions, we can answer that as we go along. So let's now talk about the next KPI that I want to talk about. This is again the cycle time. Probably you have already seen this graphic when I was describing the lead time. This would give you that for a given story, for a given requirement, the time taken from requirements analysis and to development, not just from being into the backlog, but from the requirements analysis to development. So it's kind of a subset of the lead time. How much time we actually spend working on it, not just waiting on it. So that's how the cycle time is different. Then, though you don't see any graph here or any graphic here, the number of builds which happen per sprint or per iteration or per week also gives you a good idea about how mature the team is with respect to their agile practices. If the team has adopted agility or adopted Scrum, but they are still in the waterfall mode where the development happens first for the first few days, then the testing happens after that, and then the bug fixing. And the build frequency probably would be very low or maybe equal to 1, only 1 build per sprint. But as the team improves their maturity and they deliver story by story or requirement by requirement, the number of builds will increase. When the team start using continuous integration and continuous delivery practices, when they start using uh, the DevOps practices, then the number of the build frequency might be as high as 50 also sometimes. The number of check-ins which happened and the number of builds which were created. So it also gives an idea about whether the teams are really adopting Scrum and following the SDLs in the right way within the Agile environment, or they're just focusing on, oh, we are using Scrum practices. So build frequency is another an important, interesting metric which could be used even by coaches also to see how the team is progressing. Now this was about productivity. Now let's talk about progress tracking. At a release level, at an organization level, how can we track what progress we are making, how we are taking it forward? So now let's discuss about that. I'm going to talk about 3 key KPIs here. First one is the earned business value. Second is the release burner, and third one is the release tracking by team. Now, here this KPI is actually very interesting because standalone a Scrum team or an Agile engineering team may not be actually be able to track it alone. They would need some help from the sales team, from the marketing team to kind of define a monetary value that they think they can potentially earn. Obviously, we don't know yet how much your product or system might be worth, but if the contract has already been signed and if you know that maybe these 2 features are 60% important for the customers, that could give you an earned business value or an idea about how much business value may earn as we keep on adding features. it also probably follows the old project management adage that we used to have, that 20% of the features are used 80% of the times by the most of the users and vice versa. Correct? So, Neeru's question that I want to answer here with respect to the graph, that because it is sprint over sprint, so is it the cumulative value delivered? Yes, that's very correct, Neeru. This particular KPI represents the cumulative value delivered. So as the number of features which are useful to the team will be delivered, the actual monetary value realization or the earned value realization would also continuously keep on increasing. After a while, again, in this KPI also you reach a stage that the new features or requirements you are adding, they are just wow factors, and they don't add much of a monetary value. So this graph after a certain point of time will also flatten out. At that point of time, the team might decide, okay, maybe we need to move into another project or into another release, as the case might be, another set of products. So this can give you an idea of when to cut off and move on, and say now this the features of this product or the requirements of this product are fully developed and let's take it forward. So that is also the case. But as I said earlier, it is very important then that your sales marketing team is connected into this effort, because otherwise for most of the teams finding an exact monetary value or even earned monetary value gets very difficult. Right? Abhishek has a question here, that is it always cumulative or individual sprint monetary value can be, we can do that, Abhishek, but what might happen is if you're tracking individual sprint values, this may not give you the right picture, because at some point of time you might have very large monetary value, some point of time you might have smaller monetary value added. So my recommendation, and not for this also, for almost all the other KPIs that we talked about, is to look at the cumulative part, look at a progressive improvement, look at an average of last few sprints, last few weeks as the case might be, rather than looking at individual sprint numbers. Because individual sprint numbers may not give you as much benefit in terms of understanding how the team is progressing. Because one particular sprint might be difficult for a team, while another sprint, because of what work they did in the previous sprint, they might be far better. A typical case in the point, if you see between sprint 4 and sprint 6. Yeah. So sprint 4 was flat out, there was no addition to the monetary value, but sprint 6, there was a parabolic jump. So you have to be, that's why you have to be taking a cumulative value and so on. Yes, so Ajit has a question or rather addition to what I have been talking about, that even if we don't know what is the value of feature, we can still use our business value to see how much value or dollars a feature can probably accumulate for us. That is very right. So I would recommend at this stage some works by Dan Rathon. Dan Rathon is one of the early CSPs and one of the key authors, and he has done some great work on earned business value. So you can read through his work. It's pronounced as, his last name pronounced as Rawsthorne, Dan Rathon. So please read through his works, and he has more information about this. Ashok has a question here, that this calculation will be done at the end of the sprint. Yes, that's absolutely correct. Once you have completed those requirements, backlog items, only then you can track and trace how much was actually delivered. So this is calculated after the end of the sprint. Now let's go forward. Let's talk about a release burn up and maybe a burn down chart. Now, if you see here, this was based on the number of items that the team had to complete in a given sprint. Let's say they had 600 tasks or 600 items to complete. In case you are using feature points or story points, you can even use that. But it is absolutely okay to use any of the measurement matrices or measurement KPIs that you have been using, and then still plot this graph. So at the start of the release, the team realized we have to complete about 600 tasks or 600 features. Now, as the team would progress, as the team would go through various sprints, the number of things that are still required to be done, that should reduce. So initially they had 600 items that they wanted to do. Now, after they completed some work in sprint 1, there are about 575 items probably left, and they should go down. And maybe towards the end of 13th sprint, we have completed about 400 items here, if you see this graph. So that is that you can plot as a burn up, or that you can plot as a burn down also. That is up to you how you want to use this particular KPI. Now, if there is any additional scope, you would see the bottom line keeps on changing. So instead of 0, you have, because you added probably 100 items more, the bottom line has slipped. So your actual progress is not measured from 0, but from where you had covered. So the total number of items you delivered in that particular given sprint, let's say on sprint 10, you delivered items from probably minus 20 to about 300. So that will give you an idea about how many items you really did. So let me try to draw it from a. So these are the items which are actually pending here, if you would see. So this would give an idea of how much we are progressing given from the previous sprint, or this would also give you your velocity. So release burn up and release burn down can help the product owner, the management, the sales guys to understand where the team stands now. Do they need more number of sprints, or do they need lesser number of sprints? Or if we have to finish by, let's say, June of 2016, do we need to trim down the scope a little, or can we also add some more items because the team may finish early? So, so this release burn up and release burn down give you an idea of what to change in your release or your product as you go along. Yes. So Raghav has another question here, which is very interesting. What if team members are more worried to log efforts or give any points to either story or defects as management is looking at individual burn down? Now, let me go back a little off track from here and come back. See, a lot of when we talk about agile transformation or agile improvements is all about the mindset. We're not just the engineering team or technology team has to really look into this, but the manager also should understand what agility really means. So it's the team's goals which are important rather than the individual goals. Because the moment you start measuring these items or measuring the KPIs at an individual level, you are again creating a competition. So my work is done, my work is complete, and then we need to work from that perspective. So I would still say that please be careful about using this KPIs. You may start with very basic ones, for example, acceleration, in case your manager is more looking at that. Or you may not use story points at all. Just say the number of items that the team has completed. Then the team members will have no problem or hesitation because we are not really calculating the number of hours or number of these things. Simply we are giving the number of items which are completed, number of features which are completed, number of stories which are completed. And same way on a defect side, the number of defects that we have been able to complete. So this is something that we can probably look at. Anidita has a question here. So do we consider the complexity of the story point here? So when we talk about story point as a measure, as a unit, it automatically includes complexity. So story point is a measure of both complexity and size, not just the size. Okay. So this was all about your release burn up and burn down. Now I want to, you can even track your release progress on the basis of themes that you have taken. And this is probably a very interesting KPI for the maybe the CEO or the CFO. Let's say in 2016 we have taken a target, we want to improve customer experience. So how many of my features or requirements are actually related to customer experience? How many are related to reducing the operations cost, and how many are related to getting business advantage or delivering new innovative requirements to our customers or UI to our customer? And if you see on the right hand side, same way they can see that let's say in a given week, in a given sprint, the whatever the requirements or features the team has worked upon, how much of it belonged to a particular thing to business advantage, how much it was focused on improving customer experience, and how much it was more focused on reducing the operations cost. So if you give this KPI to your CEO or CXO, it becomes a very useful tool for them to analyze, are we spending it right? Or do we need to change track and maybe focus more on, let's say, reducing the operations cost because we are running through a cash crunch. So this way, the business and the IT concerns can align. But it is very important again that the product owner, the chief product owner in case you are scaling up, and even the CXO and CFO give an idea and look out to the team on uh, how your features, how your requirements you are doing and actually fitting into my goals or the company goals. So that's something which is very important for the team to understand. So they should not just look at their user story, their requirement, their component, but they should also know the bigger picture. Where does this requirement fit into my component? Where does this requirement fit into the overall company strategy, and why are we doing this in the first place? So this gives a holistic view of both to the team members as well as to the executive on, are we going in the right direction? Are we catching up? Now this was the last of the progressive KPIs or productivity KPIs that I want to talk about. There are obviously many more available, but my recommendation or request is more to focus on continuous improvement, more to focus on a pattern that you can find in your measurements rather than focusing on individual sprints or individual releases, because that will not give you much idea about whether the team is more productive or it is less productive. So whether it is velocity, so do measure the velocity as an average of last few sprints or weeks. When you talk about number of bugs that you have closed, also measure it over last few weeks and sprints. If you talk about the earned business value, also measure it over last few releases, last few sprints, last few weeks. That gives you a real idea of whether the team is improving or they are really going down, they are stable and not making extra effort. Now this is only one single slide which is actually here because we know a lot of traditional quality KPIs that we are so used to doing. So I'm not going into details of each one of these because there's enough text which has been written about it. There are within your organizations also you have already gone through a lot of these. What do these mean? But these KPIs can be directly used even by the Agile teams also. For example, the load time, the average load time. We can talk about the average workload. We can talk about the simple testing KPIs like test coverage, test passing. You can talk about the psychometric code analysis results. You can talk about the defect density. You can talk about the defect detection efficiency. That is basically the number of defects which were logged within the sprint or found within the sprints or which were reported by the customers 6 months after the release. So all these you can look at as you go along. Now, as we come to close, and I reserve the last 10 minutes for any questions that you might have. My recommendation again that don't impose the KPIs on your team. So I would recommend that the Scrum Masters, managers, PMOs, they need to sit with the teams. They need to identify what is really relevant in that situation, what data can be really tracked, and what is useful for both the management and the teams to be able to track. Okay. So do focus on that, and because as we always say, when we talk about agility, it is all about communication and collaboration. So even deciding on what KPIs to use and how to measure is something which should be also a collaborative effort. Second thing, the KPIs are not always for the management, not always for the executive to look at. The team should also use them continuously to see how we can improve next time, how we can improve in the next sprint or next release, and this should be a part of retrospectives. Next question which comes is, who should do this? Okay. It is, though it is responsibility of the development team, but the Scrum Master, for example, or the facilitator in this case might help the team in collecting these, actually preparing those graphs and so on, and then maybe preparing sort of a dashboard. So do focus on continuous improvements. Do focus on helping out the team rather than making it as a gun to which you will hold the team. So these KPIs and metrics should be more used to focus on what more remains to be done, how we can get better in the next release of or sprint, rather than just targeting saying, okay, you did not do this, that's why you're fired. So you should focus on that. Now, Gretel has another uh, interesting comment in terms of that the release by theme KPI that we talked about. Yes, when we talk about change management, it could be a good way to communicate across the business level then how nicely we can see how the progress is made and whether the project is really delivering real business value to the customer. So yes. Now Anindita has a question here in terms of can we, which is totally a bit unrelated, but we'll still talk about it. So can high maturity required by CMI projects by being delivered by being using agile practices? I would say yes and very well. And personally, I have been able to take at least 7 nominations to level 5, CMI level 5, using agile practices. Now, it is very important when we use CMI and agile, we need to understand what both the frameworks and philosophies bring to the table. I think I talked to one of the teams this morning also. CMI never says you need to have, for example, when you talk about a project plan, which is a level 3 process area within PPM, and which is a GP within the PPM area. Oh, you should have a project plan written as a Word document or as an MPP. It simply says you need to have a project plan, which could be on a SharePoint, which could be on a mail as the case might be, and so on. So it gives you practices that you need to follow. Now, how do you follow them? What evidences you present is totally dependent on the team. A lot of auditors and non-auditors misconstrue this as you need to have a lot of documentation. No. Even if you have, for example, the minutes of meeting, daily standard will not have minutes of meeting, but there is a meeting request that the team attends every day. That is a good enough evidence, for example. So you should be using some of the practices carefully from CMI and then map them to Agile way of working. Rahul has an interesting question which I want to answer. In fact, yeah, sorry, I missed that. Isn't there a metric which we can measure if Scrum team metrics, sprint targets, or way to compare what we planned initially for the sprint and how much we achieved? Yes, and that KPI which tells us how much the team forecasted, what versus the actual delivered, is what I call as predictability. So number of items that that they have forecasted to deliver and what they actually deliver is the predictability of the team, and that also could be a good and interesting KPI to track. Now, I had one of the requests here, so before we close, in case you have any other questions, you can just write to us on info@agileta.com. So I and one of my fellow coaches would be very happy to answer your queries. But before we close today, and I have got about 5 minutes to go, Manish had a question that maybe I could explain one more time about the lead time matrix. So let me quickly go back there. So here is that little graph I was talking about. Now, lead time represents the time which a particular backlog item, particular requirement has taken to move when it was entered the backlog to the time it was actually developed or demoed. So let's say you had an item which was at number 20 on the y-axis, you see the number 20. So you can draw a straight line between that yellow place on 20 on the extreme y-axis, and you can draw where it enters the red zone. That's when this item was delivered. So this will be your lag time. For example, if I see the item at number 20, from 1st December 09 to probably it entered on 9th of February or 10th of February 2010. So it had a lead time of about 3 months, 3 months and 1 week to be precise. So this way you can find the lead time for every feature or every requirement that you are working on. Some of you are saying just to repeat the slides some once more time. Now the recording of this webinar is going to be available on our YouTube channel. So in case you have any doubts, please feel free to go through to our website and to our YouTube channel, and you can easily go through this once more again. In case you still have any doubts, please do write to me. My email ID, which I'm reachable on, is already given there. You can also connect me to on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. So you can do that. Once again, to reiterate, to claim SEOs for this particular webinar, please go to your Scrum Alliance dashboard and fill in the relevant details which the form asks for. You can put my email ID or this email ID that you show on your screen now, and you can claim SEOs for this webinar also. So we are close to our closing time now. So I would say thank you very much for listening, and continue your agile journey, and hopefully meet soon again. Thank you.